I had a take yesterday. A listener called me out on it. I'm like, I got to do some research. Turns out they were right. We talk about it on today's Locked On Auburn.
Well, Zach, I actually just finished crushing some chicken farm, and I am freaking ready to rock and roll.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. It is a War Rapport Wednesday. Mike G of the War Rapport joining us. And Mike G, I'm sure this happens with your audience over at the War Rapport, but every now and then you say something, you're feeling yourself, train of thought, and a listener kind of calls you out. A listener calls you out, and I think it would be a shame if we didn't listen to what our audience members had to say. So I read the comment. It was pretty lengthy.
Okay.
And so we were talking yesterday, Mike G, and this is something that I have a hard time with when people talk about the upside of this football team in 2022.
Okay.
Is I like the roster from top to bottom for the most part, but I have a hard time seeing, okay, how are they going to consistently move the football when the running game is not there? And that has nothing to do, I guess it has something to do with quarterback play and wide receiver play, but I think this offense is going to be so limited in between the numbers, and it was last year. And so we talked about the upside that Finley may have as far as expanding the passing game outside of the numbers. But do you have a wide receiver that can do that? We heard good things about Malcolm Johnson Jr. over the weekend.
Okay.
Shedrick Jackson. I'm higher on Shedrick Jackson than most people are, but I don't like him outside of the numbers. I think the numbers prove that.
Okay.
And so I made the claim that I think Finley offers more upside throwing outside of the numbers and making the defense spread out, right? That's the goal of an offense, is to make the defense defend every blade of grass, right? That is the goal for an offense. I made the claim that Finley has more upside than Bo. And a listener was like, well, Finley kind of stunk throwing it outside the numbers last year. And I'm like,
okay.
And you and I have talked about, how much does last year matter when you talk about TJ Finley? And so I'm just giving you numbers.
Right.
I think Finley's ready to take a huge step. I think there will be things crafted more to him, and I think other things will kind of come together. But when you looked at TJ Finley last year, in passing plays, over 20 yards downfield, outside of the numbers, he was 2 of 9. No interceptions, but he was 2 of 9. So not good. Not good.
Okay.
And these are all just raw numbers. I don't know how many of these were catchable or drops or anything like that. So let's just kind of leave that for what it is.
Okay.
Outside of the numbers to the left, from any yardage, he was 11 of 25. So 44%. Not great, right? Under 50%. You don't really want that. Outside of the right, he was 18 of 30, 60%. And his sweet spot was outside of the right between 0 yards and 10 yards downfield. So that quick stuff to the flat to the right side of the field, he was 11 of 14. That was his best clip in regards to outside passes.
Right.
And I also want to add the caveat here that I don't think Auburn's offense last year was very good at stretching the field from left to right. And so, that's not all in the quarterback play, but we'll get to other quarterbacks that operated in the offense. So his total outside throws, he was 29 of 55, so 52%. Which is pretty close to on pace. His total completion percentage last year was a little over 54%. So, I mean, it's not far off from what happened in the middle of the field either. What do you think about that clip when you just look at specifically outside passes from TJ Finley from last year, which is a small sample size? I mean, he didn't play a ton. We're talking about 55 passes. That's nothing crazy, right? What information can we gather from that that's relevant going into this season, do you think?
Well, my first comment was going to be about sample size.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to make a judgment comparing him to another quarterback on 9 throws to one side of the field versus like 100, I don't know how you make, glean anything really from that.
Sure.
I would say that having a quarterback that stays in the pocket definitely gives you more upside to throwing outside because you keep the whole field open,
right?
Rather than rolling out to one side and shortening. So there's a ton of nuance to these numbers, right?
Yep.
Like, I mean, if you're rolling out and you're dumping off easy passes to the right and then your numbers to the outside look better, I don't know what to say to that. Ultimately, I'm looking at upside and can he make every throw? I would argue that if Bo, like, and if we're talking about, in this conversation, it sounds like Bo was the quarterback he was being compared to. If we're talking about Bo, I think in terms of ability, both quarterbacks are about the same in terms of upside throwing because they both can throw the ball.
You want to give you Bo's numbers?
Yeah, sure. Well, I got Bo's in front of me, right? But it looked like Bo had a ton of throws between the numbers to the middle of the field. Most of his passes were, outside left. So if
you add them all up, PFF doesn't do a good job of like adding them up for you. So to the left, it was 36 out of 57. So that's 63%, which is actually decent considering he's a right-handed quarterback. That's actually pretty good.
Right.
And then to the right, it was actually lower, which is funny to me. 37 out of 66, which is 56%. So total 73 of 123 for 59%.
Yeah, right at his career average.
Yeah.
That's about his career average throwing the ball, in any clip was right around 60%.
Outside passing for Bo Nix beyond 20 yards, though, was 10 of 27 total for 37%. I would have guessed it would have been lower than that because, I mean, that was kind of the thing. It's like he can't connect on the deep pass. And it's like, okay, that's not as bad as I would have guessed.
Yeah,
those just outside the numbers passing, guys. We're not talking about everything, just outside the numbers as far as stretching the field because that's going to be so crucial because this offensive line is going to need every bit of help from scheme to create running lanes for Tank Bigsby. So when you stretch the offense out from left to right, your safeties have to spread out a little bit. Your corners have to, make sure they're playing the outside of the field. I mean, there's so many different things that happen that help open up the inside, both with passing, both obviously with Tank Bigsby as well. So that's why this is so important.
Yeah, I think ultimately it does come down to ability because sample size, you're never going to really be able to compare one truly to the other until there's been a requisite number of snaps. Now, think about it this way, Zach. Even if you're trying to compare quarterbacks across eras, it's hard to know which, some of our, like Jason Campbell. If Jason Campbell threw the ball as much as we did in, today, his numbers may have been, he probably would hold every Auburn passing record ever. And he had much better receivers, and great running backs and a good offensive line.
We would have more 1,000-yard receivers in our history too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bo has the advantage of we threw the ball a ton. We've thrown the ball more in his 3 years than his 3 years of throwing was more than most other quarterbacks' career. Like when you compare him to somebody like Stan White, who was the only other 4-year starter Auburn has had. Campbell was not a 4-year starter because he did not play every game of his freshman year. I'm talking about took every snap for 4 years. Bo had more passing attempts in 3 years than Stan White had in 4. So, I just think, I think the conversation, so if you're going to try to make a comparison, you have to use percentages, but even then the sample size is so small.
Changes things.
Yeah, we have not seen enough of TJ Finley to know what he is or isn't. And we've seen the upside. And I've said this 100 times. I will say this again. Finley's challenge is going to be the same as Bo's. It's not going to be how good can it get. It's going to be how bad can you keep it from being, right? The player's floor. Can he raise his floor?
Yeah.
So that the minimum expectation of production is still good enough for you to win a game.
Right. And I want to compare some numbers from other SEC quarterbacks in just a moment. There's two I think that are worth looking at that finished pretty high as far as the pecking order of SEC quarterbacks from last year. But first, I want to tell you about our friends at Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that looks and tastes like a candy bar. Also, when you go to built.com, you'll see a ton of flavors. Something for everyone. Seriously, it's crazy how many different flavors they have, and they're constantly rotating in and out new flavors to kind of keep things fresh and give you a nice variety because they want to appeal to everybody, which is so great. But also, Built Puffs. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow, which I think is pretty cool. It's crazy no one else has done that beforehand because it's such a great idea. It's delicious. And just like their bars, they're low in calories and high in protein. They keep you full, and they're delicious. They taste like a candy bar. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. It's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off. That is at Built.com. Mike G, before we jump into these SEC quarterback comparisons, what's going on at the War Rapport?
We got plenty going on over the War Rapport. We just posted an interview with athletic director Alan Green. We picked his brain about a great many things. He said he gave us a lot of information, and most notably, we went back and talked about the NCAA investigation and how that turned out. So he just gave us a lot of good stuff. My admiration for Bruce Pearl went up after this interview, so I suggest everybody go over and take a listen.
How is that even possible? That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Bruce is the man.
But yeah, check it all out. Just search the War Rapport. Their YouTube page is the first thing that comes up. Become a patron. It's worth supporting these guys. All right. So the first guy I wanted to compare TJ Finley to outside of Bo Nix was Hendon Hooker.
Hendon Hooker. Okay.
He was fourth in the SEC in passing yards last year. So I'm just thinking, okay, for Auburn to take that big leap and get a quarterback that's in the top half of passing in the conference, what do their numbers as far as outside passing have to do, right? And so Hooker was fourth in the SEC behind Bryce Young, Will Rogers, and Matt Corral.
Mm-hmm.
His outside passing over 20 yards was 41%, 13 of 31, which is pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
You take that. And I don't think there was a turnover in there either, which is crazy. Outside the numbers, to the left was 57% over 40 passes. To the right, it was 78% for 78 passes, which is crazy, dude. 61 of 78.
Mm-hmm.
That is wild. And so, and then we're not even including, the stuff that was behind the line of scrimmage there, which I don't think is relevant in this conversation. But it is a different type of offense. And I think Tennessee's offense is better at getting guys open than Auburn's offense was last year, especially. Moving forward, hopefully that trend changes. But I think that's a prime example of allowing folks to succeed in your scheme. And Heupel did a great job of that. As the season went on, you saw Tennessee get better. I don't know how much you really saw that happen with Auburn. So that's something to look at, I think, because from a talent standpoint, I think Hooker moves a little bit better. But as far as arm talent, I don't think there's a big gap between Hendon Hooker and TJ Finley. I just don't. Don't. Maybe I'm crazy. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. The other guy I want to mention is Stetson Bennett.
Okay. Oh, Stetson.
National championship winning quarterback, Stetson Bennett. He was fifth in passing. So he was behind Hendon Hooker. He had 2,862 yards. Hendon Hooker had over 2,900. But to the left, he was 31 of 45, so 68% to his left. To his right, he was 34 of 56, so 60% to his right. And you look at that, a guy who started all season, like those numbers are pretty low because they ran the ball a ton, which they were very good at. But just as far as being able to take that step forward, I don't think it's crazy to say that Finley can make this jump.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
And I don't think it's all about Finley. I think it's about Bryan Harsin. I think it's about getting guys open. And I think it's about ensuring that he is protected. And we've talked about this before. Auburn's offensive line from a pass blocking standpoint was not bad. And I think with Bo Nix not being here, or that style of quarterback not being here, where the offensive line actually can trust that the quarterback's going to stay in the pocket, I think it will help them. And so I'm I don't know. There's a lot that goes into this, Mike G. There's a lot that goes into an effective passing offense, but I think that they can improve in these areas. I really do.
Yeah, I would say so. You're talking about Stetson Bennett and Hendon Hooker. You're talking about two quarterbacks that had two of the lowest drop rates in the league as well, too. So that can't be understated.
Great point.
Stetson Bennett had 14 drops, which ranked pretty good in the SEC last year. Hendon Hooker only had 16 drops. Now, Bennett threw the ball a whole lot less, right? Versus somebody like Hendon Hooker, who literally had almost 100 more. Well, no, I take that back. No, actually, they were pretty even. They were pretty even in terms of pass attempts. Okay. But my point being is that the receivers are going to play a role in some of these numbers. So that brings me to what I think is the most important thing for TJ Finley is chemistry with his wide receivers. Understanding where to put a deep ball for your receiver. What did we say was one of the most frustrating things to watch as an Auburn fan over the years was watching Anthony Schwartz get overthrown constantly. Mm-hmm. Fastest guy in college football. How can you practice with this guy every day and consistently overthrow him on deep balls? Right. TJ Finley came in and did some of the same with some of these guys in terms of overthrows down the field. So can he get more touch on his balls down the field? And can he put a little air on it and just give the receivers a chance to go make a play? So that's going to be his challenge. And I think that having had now a whole offseason to work with these receivers, he should have that chemistry with them. Now, when we interviewed him, he talked about going out and throwing with the receivers and getting guys out of their room, even getting other quarterbacks out and say, hey, we're going to go throw. Let's go. So that experience, is very, very important for him to develop. I don't think he had a chance to properly do that last year.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't really his team at that point. And that matters. That definitely matters. So those are just some numbers that I thought were interesting in response to getting called out yesterday. And, take it for what it's worth. But I do think those numbers will go up, assuming TJ's the starter. I mean, some of you watching or listening may be like, why are we talking about TJ? He's not going to start. I'm like, well, I think there's a real chance that he does, but it's impossible to know for sure. And that is a good point. When we come back, I want to talk about who Mike G is excited to watch on Saturday regarding A-Day at Jordan-Hare Stadium. But first, today's show is brought to you by rockauto.com. With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it is virtually impossible, to go and keep everything that any kind of customer may need because there's so many different options out there right now. And so when you, the customer, go into one of these traditional chain storefronts, odds are they're not going to have what you're looking for. RockAuto.com, however, will have that. And so you can go to RockAuto.com right now and you'll see that their prices are significantly cheaper than the traditional chain storefronts, and it'll arrive right to your door. So go to RockAuto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car, truck, or SUV. And write Locked On Auburn in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. That's at rockauto.com. All right, Mike G. 8 days, just days away.
Yeah.
I'm asking every guest that comes on the show this week to kind of give me a name on the offensive side and the defensive side of the ball as far as guys that they're excited to watch and see. So let's start with the offense. Who are you excited to watch this Saturday at 8 a.m. on offense?
This is not going to be a shock to anybody.
Malcolm Johnson Jr.
Yeah, listen. Now the conversations hear me out. The conversation we just had about TJ Finley.
Yes.
And, chemistry with the wide receivers, Malcolm's going to play a big role in that. And we need somebody who can take the top off the defense. You're talking about somebody who runs a 10-second 100-meter dash. I mean, he's a track star. He's a track star at wide receiver on the outside.
He's faster than the speed of light, Mike G.
I certainly hope so. Bryan Harsin made a comment about Zach, about him making a move on a route to get a guy off him and get open and make a play on the ball when he talked about people who have improved. And
when Mike G saw this tweet about the quote, he screenshotted and sent it to me. I'm sitting in church and I pull my phone out and Mike G's texting me about Malcolm Johnson Jr. I'm like, bro, it's Sunday, but your love for Malcolm Johnson Jr. takes no days off, and I appreciate that.
Hey, listen, I felt like God wanted me to let you know that he has a plan for Malcolm Johnson Jr.
All right.
And that plan is for him to be our deep threat this year. So I'm excited on the offensive side of the ball to just see what kind of chemistry he has with these quarterbacks and whether he's going to turn into the guy, the go make a play for us guy that Auburn desperately needs on the outside.
What do you like more, Malcolm Johnson Jr. or sliced bread?
I'm kind of doing a no carb right now, so I'm gonna go Malcolm Johnson Jr.
So you think Malcolm Johnson Jr. is the greatest thing since sliced bread? That's
exactly. Yep, that's what I'm going. I'll die with that. I'll die on that hill.
Cool. All right. What about on defense? Who are you looking for on defense?
Okay. All right. So there are a lot of potential picks here.
No question.
Because there are new names all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I am actually going to go with Dillon Brooks.
Okay.
I want to see what this young man has. Now, he fell into our lap because of
gift.
Right, Happy Meal Gate over at Tennessee last year.
Right.
And he didn't get any time on the field last year, but he's now been in Auburn's strength and conditioning program for a calendar year. And I'm really excited to see what this young man is going to do. So it's one thing to get these transfers that come in, but this is a homegrown guy,
right?
Who is, ESPN had him as like a top 20 recruit in the country. Yeah. So he was lower on some other boards, but ESPN rated him really high. And I'm super excited to see what this kid can do because we lost Zacoby McClain, and having a dynamic end/linebacker or wherever, I'm interested to see where they're going to put him.
I think he's pretty much exclusively at edge right now.
Edge rusher or whatever.
They're so thin. Eku talked about it, and then Coach Harsin talked about, like, I think they feel really good about the three guys they have: Derek Hall, Eku Leota, and Dillon Brooks. But after that, there appears to be a pretty decent drop off.
Yeah, I'm excited to see a young guy get out there, a young recruit. It's going to say a lot about how we're developing talent. So it's one thing to go out and get these junior college transfers that come in here and they kind of are what they are, but they're going to be what they're going to be. Like Eku Leota was a solid transfer. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure Auburn made him any better. I just think he was a solid pickup for us. But the development pipeline is going to, kids like Dillon are going to show us what our development pipeline looks like for young guys that come in and whether we have what it takes to get the most out of these kids.
Well, we've seen them transform their bodies. I mean, their first year in the program, and Eku came in late, and so, I mean, now he's gained 20 pounds. He's an absolute unit out there. But like some of these younger recruits, like Caden Bridges, gained 20 pounds. So, and Dillon Brooks, I mean, just physically, he does not look like a redshirt freshman. I mean, he looks like a grown man getting ready for a senior season. And I think that matters. I think it's very, very important. But the big question is like, okay, you can develop them, you can develop their bodies and make them look like Marines, which is great. That's how I like my edge rushers, looking like jacked boys. But the whole, like, creating a football player,
right?
That's different, right? Well, I mean, it certainly seems like he's got the athletic prowess, but can you pull it all together and make a really good football player out of him?
That's the more important development piece.
No doubt.
Technique, right? Yeah. You can have all the speed in the world, but if you run yourself out of every play as an edge rusher and you don't know when to keep it in control, when to bounce it inside, it's cool to be fast. But speed is not all that you need. Strength is not all that you need. No. Teaching a guy how to harness those things in the right situations to make a play is what's going to be most important. So I'll be watching that for Dillon Brooks, man. I think that his development and how he does this year will say a lot about, what we're doing on the defensive side of the ball in terms of development.
Yeah. What does that first step off the line look like? Mm-hmm. Dillon Brooks with his long arms, can he use those arms to create separation and then take another quick step, throw the offensive tackle off balance and kind of use its abilities there. That'll be fun to see for sure. And I think those isolated one-on-one battles that you see, Dillon Brooks versus Alec Jackson or Brendan Coffey or Killian Dyer, whoever's playing tackle against him at that moment. I think those isolated one-on-one moments are the things where you can actually pull some meaning out of A-Day. But people aren't paying attention to that. People are paying attention to where the football is. But as far as these guys that are like competing for playing time, especially on the offensive tackle front, and Dillon knows he's going to be part of the rotation because he has to be. It's just a numbers thing. But does he play 10% of the snaps or does he play 25% of the snaps?
Yeah.
And that's something that he's actually going to be competing for.
Yeah, it sucks because on defense, I mean, for these rushers, they can't hit the quarterback, so it's hard to know how any play to turn out because they've got to pull up before.
No, but for the most part, I mean, you're winning the battle before you get to the quarterback, though.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean?
Fair enough. Yeah, it's just sometimes you don't know what you got until you put these guys in a game in live game situations. But you're right. We can take a look at technique and see if he's beating his man off the ball. Yeah. I'm not sure. No knock to our O-line, but how he does against our O-line and how he's going to do against SEC O-lines can be two different things. One of the things that makes some of the better teams good is that the competition that they go up against in practice is equal to or greater than what they're going to see on Saturdays. So when you have a good development piece, iron sharpens iron in that respect. Totally. So, when your scout team guys are still worthy of scholarships, it helps. These guys sharpen themselves in practice. Courtney Taylor used to tell us going up against Carlos Rogers was, the best DB in college football that year was something that helped him greatly because he felt like from a competition standpoint, if I can
easier on Saturday.
Yeah, if I can beat Carlos, right? If I can beat Carlos, who's going to stop me on Saturday? Right. So I hope that's I'm not sure we're getting that on D-line versus O-line in this situation. But it doesn't mean these guys aren't going to be good, though. It just means
I think you may be getting it. I think the offensive line may be benefiting from it.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Does Auburn have a top 5 SEC defensive line? Maybe. That wouldn't shock me at all. So, Mike G, one more time, how can people support you guys over at the War Rapport?
Hey, man, just go over to YouTube and watch. So hit subscribe and watch. We are doing a lot of great things, so watch out for these interviews that we're bringing you this offseason. We're working hard January to July to bring you guys more content.
That is Mike G with the War Rapport. Go check out those guys. We'll be back tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn. See ya.